They smashed the paper price again last night, straight through 68. Algorithms, cell walls, margin pressure, same playbook, same theater. And once again, they want you focused on the number on the screen instead of what actually just changed underneath the entire silver market. Because while traders were watching red candles flicker on COMEX, while commentators were calling this healthy consolidation, Tesla quietly crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. This wasn't an announcement, it wasn't a press release, it didn't trend on social media. But buried inside Tesla's latest manufacturing update is confirmation that the 4680 battery is no longer a pilot experiment. It is scaling, rapidly, multiple lines, multiple factories. And that single fact turns silver from a cyclical commodity into a structural choke point. Most people still think the 4680 story is about cost. Bigger cells, fewer welds, faster assembly. They think this is about shaving dollars per kilowatt hour. That narrative is dangerously incomplete, because what actually makes the 4680 work at scale is not the size of the cell, it's the internal architecture, the current density, the thermal pathway. And the material doing the heavy lifting inside that architecture is silver. Not as decoration, not as wiring trivia, as a functional load-bearing material inside the battery system. Here's the mistake Wall Street keeps making. They model batteries the same way they model smartphones, tiny amounts of silver, fractions of a gram, price insensitive, disposable. But the 4680 is not a phone battery. It's a structural energy device designed to push extreme current through extremely tight tolerances without melting itself. That means contacts, bus bars, current collectors, thermal interfaces. And all of those components are now being redesigned to handle higher power densities at scale. Copper alone can't do it without overheating. Aluminum can't do it without losses. Silver is the only metal that solves conductivity, heat, and reliability simultaneously. Physics leaves no alternative. Tesla knows this. That's why the 4680 isn't just bigger, it's denser, hotter, faster. And that changes silver demand per vehicle in a way that does not scale linearly. It steps higher. This is the part nobody wants to say out loud. When you move from thousands of cells per pack to fewer, larger, higher load cells, you don't reduce material stress. You concentrate it. And concentrated stress demands better conductors. That means more silver per connection, thicker coatings, higher purity, tighter tolerances. You don't thrift that out. You add it. Now, multiply that by Tesla's stated goal of tens of millions of vehicles per year. Not someday, this decade. Add energy storage, megapacks, grid buffers, AI data centers riding on the same battery architecture. Suddenly, silver is no longer an accessory metal. It becomes a throughput constraint. And that's why the price smash matters. Not because it signals weakness, but because it signals denial. The paper market is still trading silver like it's 2015. Tesla is building like it's 2030. Those two realities cannot coexist for long. Because once a manufacturer like Tesla commits to a materials architecture at scale, they don't negotiate with the price. They secure supply, they lock contracts, they absorb inventory, quietly, relentlessly. And when that happens, the chart stops mattering. This isn't about a rally, this is about a threshold. And in the next part, I'm going to show you exactly why the 4680 battery turns silver demand from flexible to inelastic, why substitution fails, and why this scale-up creates a demand shock the market is not priced for at any level. Stay with me. To understand why the 4680 scale-up breaks every silver demand model on Wall Street, you have to stop thinking in ounces per device and start thinking in current per square millimeter. Batteries don't fail because they lack energy. They fail because they can't move that energy fast enough without destroying themselves. That's the bottleneck Tesla solved. That solution has a silver signature all over it. The 4680 cell pushes far higher current through fewer pathways, fewer tabs, shorter distances, thicker conductors. That design only works if resistance stays low while heat stays manageable. Every milliohm matters. Every degree matters. This is where silver enters the system not as an option, but as a requirement. Copper is cheap, but it oxidizes and heats under sustained load. Aluminum is light, but its conductivity drops sharply at high current density. Nickel survives heat, but its resistance is too high for fast discharge and charge cycles at scale. Silver is the only metal that sits at the intersection of maximum conductivity, minimum thermal loss, and long-term stability. That's not marketing, that's the periodic table. Inside a 4680 pack, silver shows up where failure is unacceptable. Contact interfaces, high current bus structures, thermal spreaders, bonding layers. These are not micrograms, these are grams per pack. And unlike consumer electronics, these grams are non-negotiable. You either meet the spec or the system fails. This is why the phrase, "they'll engineer it out," keeps showing up, and why it keeps being wrong. You cannot engineer around conductivity limits. You can only pay for them. If Tesla reduces silver thickness, resistance rises. If resistance rises, heat rises. If heat rises, cycle life collapses. And when cycle life collapses, the entire economic premise of the battery fails. So Tesla doesn't ask whether silver is expensive. Tesla asks whether failure is acceptable. The answer is no. Now zoom out. Tesla is not building a few thousand of these packs. They are building millions. Each line, each factory, each incremental ramp locks in silver demand years in advance. Once those lines are running, silver is no longer discretionary. It becomes a feedstock. This is the moment the market is missing. Demand stops responding to price. It responds to production schedules. If silver is 60, Tesla buys. If silver is 100, Tesla buys. If silver is 200, Tesla buys and raises vehicle prices. Because stopping production costs more than paying up for material. That's what inelastic demand looks like. And Tesla isn't alone. Every automaker chasing range, fast charging, and safety is watching the 4680 architecture. They will copy it, or license it, or be forced out of the market. That creates convergence. When an industry converges on a design, it converges on materials. Silver doesn't get replaced. It gets standardized. This is how industrial squeezes begin. Quietly, not with headlines, with specifications, with procurement contracts, with engineers signing off on bills of materials that cannot be changed without redesigning the entire system. While traders argue about whether silver should be 65 or 70, Tesla is arguing about how many metric tons they need per quarter. Those are very different conversations. One is noise, the other is destiny. And here's the part that should make you uncomfortable. None of this shows up immediately in reported demand data. The market doesn't see it until inventories disappear, until premiums explode, until delivery times stretch. By the time the charts confirm it, the metal is already gone. In the next part, I'm going to quantify this, not with hype, with math. We're going to translate Tesla's production targets into ounces, compare that to global supply, and show you exactly where the break happens, not someday on a timeline. Because once you see the numbers, you'll understand why the price smash wasn't bearish. It was the last illusion before reality asserts itself. Now let's do the math the market refuses to do, because once you see it laid out cleanly, the entire silver pricing model collapses. Not emotionally, mathematically. Start with Tesla's own targets. Publicly, conservatively, they are aiming for 20 million vehicles per year before this decade ends. That number gets dismissed as aspirational, but the factories are being built to support it. The tooling is being ordered. The 4680 lines are not theoretical. They exist, and they are being scaled for volume, not demonstration. Now layer in energy storage, megapacks, power walls, grid scale buffers feeding AI data centers. These systems use the same battery architecture principles. High current, high reliability, zero tolerance for thermal failure. The silver requirements don't disappear, they increase. So let's stay conservative, extremely conservative. Assume the average 4680 vehicle uses only 50 grams of silver across its internal battery-related components. That's not a headline number, that's a floor, but we'll use it anyway. 20 million vehicles times 50 grams equals 1 billion grams of silver. That's roughly 32 million ounces per year, from Tesla alone. Now add stationary storage. Tesla has stated targets that imply battery capacity equal to several million additional vehicles annually. Even if we assume that adds only another 10 million ounces per year, we are now at 40 plus million ounces of new inelastic demand. Here's the problem. Global silver mine production sits around 830 million ounces per year. Recycling adds maybe 180 million more. And the market is already in deficit before Tesla's scale-up fully hits. Solar panels, electronics, medical, defense, all of that demand already exceeds supply. So where do you find an extra 40 million ounces that cannot be substituted, cannot be delayed, and cannot be redesigned away? You don't. And remember, we're still being gentle. We're assuming 50 grams per vehicle. Internal estimates from battery engineers suggest that number could be significantly higher as power density increases. We're also ignoring the rest of the auto industry: Ford, GM, Volkswagen, BYD, Toyota. Every one of them chasing the same performance envelope. This is how shortages actually form. Not because the world runs out of silver overnight, but because the margin disappears, the buffer vanishes, the system loses flexibility. One unexpected surge and there's nothing left to absorb it. That's when price stops being discovered and starts being rationed. Now consider inventory, the visible stockpiles, the exchanges, the vaults everyone points to as proof there's plenty of silver. Most of that metal is already spoken for, leased, encumbered, hypothecated, promised multiple times over. When industrial buyers step in and demand physical delivery, paper claims evaporate. This is why backwardation matters. This is why premiums matter. They are early warning signals that the physical market is tightening long before the charts react. And here's the final layer most people miss. Tesla doesn't buy silver the way investors do. They don't wait for dips. They don't speculate. They secure supply years ahead. Long-term contracts, strategic stockpiles, direct relationships with refiners. Every ounce Tesla locks up is an ounce that never sees the open market again. So when analysts tell you 30 million ounces isn't that much, what they're really saying is they don't understand how thin the margin already is. They don't understand that the system is balanced on a knife edge. And they don't understand that once industrial demand turns inelastic, the price mechanism breaks. In the next part, we're going to talk about why recycling won't save this market, why new mines can't respond in time, and why this supply shock is front-loaded, not spread out over decades. Because this isn't a slow burn, it's a step change. And once it hits, there is no rewind button. At this point, the usual objections start flying. Recycling will save us, new mines will open, technology will find a workaround. These arguments sound reasonable until you examine them closely. Then they fall apart. Start with recycling. On paper, silver recycling looks significant, nearly 200 million ounces per year. Enough, some say, to absorb new demand. That's a dangerous illusion. Silver is not like gold. Gold is recycled because it's concentrated. Bars, jewelry, coins. Easy to recover. Silver is dispersed. It's dusted across billions of products in microscopic quantities. Phones, circuit boards, solar panels, medical devices, missiles. Extracting it costs more energy and money than the metal is worth. That's why less than 20% of silver ever comes back. The rest is effectively destroyed. Buried in landfills, locked inside infrastructure, lost forever. When silver goes into a 4680 battery pack, it doesn't come back for 15 or 20 years. That metal is removed from circulation for an entire generation. Recycling does not respond to price spikes in real time. It lags by years, sometimes decades. It cannot plug a sudden industrial hole. Now look at mining. This is where the fantasy really collapses. Silver is not mined because silver is valuable. It is mined as a byproduct. Lead, zinc, copper. Over 70% of global silver production depends on the economics of other metals. If copper demand slows, silver output drops regardless of silver's price. Even when prices rise, mines don't magically appear. From discovery to production takes 10 to 15 years. Permits, environmental reviews, infrastructure, political risk. And the ore grades are collapsing. 20 years ago, a good mine produced 15 ounces per ton. Today, 4 ounces per ton is considered strong. That means more rock, more energy, more water, more cost. Rising prices don't create supply quickly. They create scarcity faster. Then there's geopolitics. Mexico and Peru dominate silver production and both face rising political pressure. Protests, royalty hikes, permit freezes. Russia is sanctioned. China hoards. Exactly at the moment demand becomes critical, supply becomes fragile. This is not a coincidence. It's a structural squeeze. And here's the part nobody wants to confront. When silver becomes critical to energy security, governments intervene. They don't ask permission. They prioritize industry. They ration access. They invoke emergency powers. We've seen this movie before with oil, uranium, rare earths. When Tesla tells regulators they cannot meet production mandates without silver, the response will not be, let the market decide. The response will be allocation. That means investors compete not with price, but with policy. This is why the 4680 scale-up matters so much. It transforms silver from an industrial input into a strategic material, something nations care about, something they secure, something they protect. And once that shift happens, the free market phase ends. In the next part, we're going to talk about how this transition plays out in real time. The signals, the psychological warfare, the volatility designed to shake weak hands before the real move begins. Because the most violent part of a supply shock is not the rally, it's the disbelief before it. This is the phase where the market turns hostile. Not bullish, hostile. Because once the fundamentals are locked in and the supply response is impossible, the only remaining variable is psychology. And psychology is where institutions still have leverage. You're going to see extreme volatility, sharp rallies followed by brutal smashes, headlines screaming bubble one day and collapse the next. This is not random, it's tactical. When a market knows it's cornered, it tries to exhaust participants before repricing. The goal is simple. Shake out anyone who does not understand why the demand is inelastic. Make them doubt the thesis. Make them sell to relieve stress. Because once the metal is gone, there's no way back in. Here's how you can tell the difference between real weakness and manufactured fear. Watch the physical signals. Premiums, availability, delivery times. If price drops but premiums rise, the move is fake. If price drops but inventory doesn't return, the move is fake. Paper can be printed instantly, metal cannot. This is where the disconnect becomes obvious. Futures markets trade narratives. Physical markets trade reality. When Tesla and other manufacturers are pulling silver out of circulation quietly, the futures price becomes less informative. It turns into a distraction. And this is where most people make their biggest mistake. They assume the price will warn them, that there will be time, that the breakout will be obvious. It never is. In every historical squeeze, the real move begins while sentiment is still negative, while experts are still dismissive, while commentators are still calling for pullbacks. By the time consensus turns bullish, the metal is already scarce. Think about palladium. Think about uranium. Think about rare earths. The pattern never changes. Industrial buyers accumulate first, price lags, then price gaps violently as inventory vanishes, not because demand explodes overnight, but because supply was already gone. Tesla's 4680 scale-up accelerates this timeline. It compresses years of demand into quarters. It forces procurement decisions earlier than the market expects. And once those contracts are signed, those ounces are removed permanently. This is why the current price action feels irrational, because it is disconnected from the real driver. Traders are arguing over charts, while engineers are rewriting the future of energy storage. In the final part, I'm going to bring this together: the technology, the math, the supply constraints, and what this means for price, not as a target, but as a consequence. Because when silver is required, not desired, the question stops being how high it can go. The question becomes whether it can be bought at all. Now we reach the uncomfortable conclusion most people try to avoid. Price targets are the wrong framework. They make this feel like a trade. What Tesla's 4680 scale-up creates is not a trade. It creates a reclassification. When a material moves from optional to mandatory, from flexible to inelastic, price stops acting as a signal and starts acting as a gate. At first, it rises to slow demand at the margins. Jewelry buyers step back. Small investors hesitate. Then it rises further, not to balance supply, but to decide who gets access. That's when you see behavior that looks irrational from the outside. Manufacturers paying premiums far above spot. Governments stepping in behind the scenes. Long-term offtake agreements signed quietly at prices that never appear on a chart. Silver has lived most of its modern life as an afterthought. A metal that could be borrowed, leased, swapped, papered over. The 4680 battery breaks that illusion because it ties silver consumption directly to energy throughput. Not aesthetics, not convenience, throughput. Once energy depends on silver, everything depends on silver. This is where the historical parallels matter. Oil in the 1970s, uranium in the 2000s, rare earths in the last decade. In every case, the market underestimated how fast industrial users would lock supply. In every case, price lagged reality until the last moment. And in every case, when the repricing came, it didn't climb, it jumped. That's why the volatility you're seeing now feels disorienting. It's not discovery, it's resistance. The system is trying to maintain an old equilibrium while the inputs no longer support it. And here's the part that matters most. Tesla does not need permission to do this. They don't need consensus. They don't need headlines. They build, they scale, they consume, and everyone else reacts. Once a company of that size commits to a materials pathway, it drags the entire supply chain with it. Refiners adapt, miners reallocate, governments pay attention. And suddenly, a market that looked liquid becomes very small. This is why silver feels quiet right before it doesn't. The transition happens below the surface, in spreadsheets, in factories, in procurement contracts you will never see. When the realization finally hits the public narrative, it will feel sudden. Overnight, unfair, unexplained. But in truth, it will have been building for years. The 4680 scale-up is not a headline, it is a fuse. And once it burns down far enough, price won't be something you watch. It will be something you chase. That is the difference between speculation and inevitability. There's one more layer you need to see, because this is where most people misjudge timing. They assume demand shows up when products ship, when cars roll off the line, when batteries hit the market. That's not how industrial demand works. Demand shows up when decisions are made, not when headlines appear. Tesla does not wait until a vehicle is sold to secure materials. They lock supply at the design phase, at the factory planning phase, at the financing phase, years in advance. Once a battery architecture is finalized, procurement starts competing for future ounces immediately. Those ounces disappear long before you ever see a finished car. That's why the market always feels blindsided. By the time demand becomes visible in sales data, the physical metal has already been absorbed. This is also why paper markets keep getting it wrong. Futures pricing assumes optionality. It assumes buyers can walk away. That assumption collapses when a material becomes mission critical. Tesla cannot pause production because silver is expensive. Pausing production costs more than paying any price the market can print. This creates a feedback loop. Rising prices don't destroy demand. They validate urgency. They force competitors to secure supply earlier at higher prices, accelerating the squeeze. Now add one more factor, signaling. When Tesla scales a design, everyone else reads it as proof. Automakers that were hesitating suddenly move. Suppliers that were cautious suddenly hoard. Governments that were passive suddenly classify materials as strategic. This is how a quiet engineering decision turns into a global materials event. And here's the psychological trap. The price will not move smoothly. It will jump, stall, drop violently, then jump higher. Every drop will be framed as the top. Every rally will be called unsustainable. This narrative exists for one reason, to keep you uncertain while supply is being locked. Certainty comes too late. The people who benefit from this transition are not the ones who time the exact bottom. They're the ones who understand that once inelastic demand is locked in, the outcome is no longer a question of if, but when. Tesla's 4680 scale-up marks that lock-in moment. The battery design is set, the factories are scaling, the silver requirement is embedded. From here, the market can argue with physics for a while. It always does. But physics never loses. In the final part, I'm going to bring this back to the present moment. Why the current price still exists, why the window is open at all, and why that window closes not with a warning but with a gap. So the obvious question becomes this. If everything we've walked through is already in motion, why does silver still feel available? Why does the price still flicker instead of explode? Why does it still feel like there's time? The answer is delay, not denial. Delay is built into the system. The paper market exists to absorb shocks before they reach the physical layer. It stretches time. It creates the illusion of supply where none actually exists. As long as contracts can be rolled, settled in cash, or offset against other paper claims, the market can pretend balance still exists. But that only works until enough participants demand the real thing. Industrial buyers don't care about paper. They care about continuity. They care about not shutting down a billion-dollar production line because a shipment didn't arrive. When those buyers decide the paper layer is unreliable, they bypass it. They go directly to refiners, directly to miners, directly to long-term offtake agreements. That's the moment the paper market loses control. And that moment does not announce itself politely. It shows up as delivery delays, as sudden rule changes, as margin hikes, as temporary suspensions, as cash settlement clauses quietly enforced. These are not signs of strength. They are signs of strain. This is why the current calm is misleading. It is the calm created by abstraction. The further silver moves into critical infrastructure, the less tolerance there is for abstraction. You cannot power a factory with a promise. Tesla understands this. That's why the 4680 scale-up isn't just an engineering story. It's a procurement story. It's a logistics story. It's a security story. And once one major player acts, others are forced to follow, not because they want to, but because the alternative is being shut out. This is how windows close in commodity markets, not with countdowns, not with sirens, but with a quiet shift in who gets access. One day, silver is something you can buy. The next, it's something you need permission to acquire. By the time that distinction becomes obvious, the repricing has already happened. In the next part, we're going to talk about what happens when that repricing collides with leverage, why the move doesn't just rise, but accelerates, and why the most violent phase always arrives after people think the story is already over. This is where leverage turns a supply problem into a crisis, because the silver market is not just thin. It is stacked. Paper claims layered on top of paper claims, all assuming that delivery will never be demanded at scale. That assumption holds only as long as nobody important calls the bluff. When industrial demand becomes urgent, leverage becomes dangerous. Futures markets function on the belief that most contracts will never see metal. They'll be rolled, netted, or settled in cash. That's fine in a world where silver is marginal. It collapses in a world where silver is mission critical. When real buyers step in and demand certainty, the leverage that once dampened volatility becomes an accelerant. This is how squeezes actually happen. Not because speculators pile in, but because the system is forced to reconcile promises with inventory. When too many promises chase too little metal, something has to give. And what gives first is confidence. That's when exchanges change rules. Margins jump overnight. Position limits appear mid-move. Cash settlement replaces delivery. These are always framed as risk management. In reality, they are containment. Attempts to slow a process that cannot be stopped. Because leverage only delays the outcome, it does not prevent it. And this is where most people get shaken out. Not because they were wrong, but because the ride becomes unbearable. They confuse volatility with failure. They mistake violence for weakness. But if the underlying driver is inelastic demand, volatility is not a warning, it's confirmation. Tesla's 4680 scale-up ensures that once this leverage unwind begins, it won't resolve with a gentle rebalancing. It resolves with a reset, a new price regime, a smaller, tighter market where silver trades like a strategic material instead of a speculative toy. This is why the most dangerous moment is not the rally. It's the pause, the period where price seems to stabilize and commentators declare the crisis over. That's usually when the final inventory drains quietly, setting the stage for the next leg. In the final part, I'm going to bring this back to the present moment. Why this still feels unresolved, why the window still exists, and why once it closes, it doesn't reopen at a higher price. It disappears entirely. So here we are at the point where all the threads finally meet. The technology is real, the scale is real, the demand is locked in, the supply cannot respond. And yet, the market still behaves as if this is optional, temporary, reversible. That disconnect is the window. Windows don't close because everyone agrees. They close because enough of the right players act. And in this case, those players are not traders. They are manufacturers, governments, and infrastructure builders who cannot afford to be wrong. Tesla's 4680 scale-up is not waiting for price confirmation. It is waiting for continuity. Every quarter that production ramps, silver moves further out of the open market and deeper into long-term commitments. Those ounces don't come back. They don't get resold. They don't respond to sentiment. This is why the current price still exists at all. Because the paper market is still absorbing the shock. Because leverage is still masking scarcity. Because most participants are still treating silver as something that can be swapped, borrowed, delayed, or replaced. That assumption is already false. It just hasn't been acknowledged yet. And when acknowledgement finally arrives, it won't look like a smooth repricing. It will look like gaps. It will look like shortages. It will look like explanations that arrive after the fact. Analysts scrambling to retrofit narratives onto a move they didn't anticipate. By then, access will matter more than cost. This is the phase where regret forms. Not because people didn't predict the move, but because they underestimated how fast optionality disappears once demand becomes mandatory. They thought there would be another pullback, another calm period, another chance to reassess. There usually isn't. Every major industrial squeeze ends the same way. Quiet accumulation, violent repricing, then normalization at a level nobody thought possible beforehand. The 4680 battery doesn't invent this pattern, it triggers it. Silver doesn't need hype. It doesn't need belief. It only needs to be required. Now it is. That's why this moment matters. Not because of what silver might do next week or next month, but because of what it has already become. A bottleneck, a dependency, a gatekeeper. Once a material crosses that line, the market never treats it the same again. The price you see today exists only because the system hasn't fully accepted that reality yet. When it does, the conversation changes. From charts to contracts, from targets to allocation, from speculation to security. That is the transition you're watching in real time. And when the window finally closes, it won't slam shut with a headline. It will close quietly, permanently, and without apology.